Hello, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to review Canon's brand new 24-105 f3.5 to 5.6 IS STM lens. Now this lens, you can't really talk about it without dealing with the elephant in the room, and that is the question of why. Canon already has a very successful and a very good 24-105 f4 LIS lens that is proven to be a very extremely popular option with both amateurs and pros alike. And on paper, at the moment, you can look and you can compare the list price and see that the Canon 24-105 f4 LIS sells for around $1,100, and this lens is debuting at a price of right around $600. And so on paper, of course, it makes perfect sense. Until you deal with the reality of the fact that almost no one has ever paid full price for a 24-105 f4 LIS. It has been included in as a kit lens with a number of professional bodies, and because of that, the market is saturated with them. And in the average kit where that lens is added on, you'll find that it adds on a premium of about $600 over the bare camera body selling. And so the reality is on the used market, where there are many options, and not to mention all of the sale prices on the 24-105 f4 LIS, it's extremely rare for someone to pay that $1,100 for it, and probably I don't know what an exact median figure would be, but I would suggest that it's probably more in the $800 range to $900 would be the top of the range. And of course, if you're getting in a kit lens, or as a kit, you're getting it for a much lower price. And so that creates a certain challenge for this. This is a variable aperture, kind of consumer grade lens, and that has Canon's superior L-series build quality. It has a constant f4 aperture throughout the focal range, and while its image stabilizer is not as effective as the newest versions that Canon has released, it still does a very good job. And it offers a more robust build quality. It's weather sealed, and I've used several copies of the 24-105 f4 LIS, own several of them, and it's a very good lens. And so that does create a bit of a challenge. That being said, I am comparing a lens that has been on the market for some time compared to a brand new offering. This lens probably will not remain at that price point, and when the price on it begins to come down, it will make more sense at that point. Not long ago, Sigma released its own 24-105 f4 OS HSM lens, and people kind of scratched their heads a bit at that point when it was released, and it appears with good reason. While that lens is a very nice lens, and it rivaled and in some cases even exceeded Canon's image quality from the L-series lens, it was not priced any cheaper, and it was heavier, had a larger front element, and there were places where it was not as good as the Canon. And so as a result, that lens has not really sold particularly well. The news just recently arrived that Sigma is suspending production of that lens, at least temporarily, and focusing on other things. And so that sends a signal that most of us interpreted that this lens is not performing as Sigma desired. And so they are focusing on other more successful efforts. So once you get past the why of this new 24-105 STM lens, and you begin to deal with the lens itself, it becomes a much more rosy picture. This is a very nice consumer grade zoom lens, and it employs Canon's STM or stepping motor technology, which is different from the USM, the ultrasonic motor, or the older micro motors that Canon would sometimes use. And so this is certainly an improvement over the older micro motor focus. It's faster, and it's very quiet and focus. I still prefer a good USM focusing motor to the STM technology for a variety of reasons that I'll detail in just a moment. But in terms of the actual focus speed and accuracy, this lens, it does quite well. I find that there is just a split-second lag before focus acquisition begins. But once it actually kind of spools up and begins, it actually focuses very quickly at all focal ranges. And so that's certainly a positive. Now, Canon has not put STM technology in many of its full frame offerings. The one that I'm aware of is the 40mm f2.8 STM lens, a pancake lens. And that's certainly understandable because of both a low price point and also because of its very compact nature. The STM technology is obviously more compact than what a USM drive would be. And so it made sense on that lens. This lens is a little bit more of a head scratcher because the advantage of the stepping motor technology is really more for autofocus during video recording. And at the moment, Canon doesn't have a full frame body that really employs that autofocus capability during video recording. And so it's a technology that doesn't necessarily suit Canon's full frame lineup. But at the same time, a lens beginning at 24mm isn't necessarily a logical option for a crop sensor either. 24mm is not particularly wide on a crop sensor. And so because of that, the 24-105 lens has been much more popular on full frame bodies than what it has been on crop sensor cameras. Canon has been retooling almost all of its popular zoom ranges in crop sensor line, the EFS line, with STM versions. And those STM versions have universally been a vast improvement over their predecessors. Better optics, better focusing, better image stabilizer, etc., etc. And so it makes sense then, but I'm still kind of trying to wrap my head around where Canon is coming from with this particular lens, considering it is a full frame lens and a focal length that makes a lot more sense on a full frame body. This probably is a lens that's not developed for Canon's current full frame bodies, but probably with future technology in mind, and certainly Canon's next generation of full frame bodies probably will employ some technology that can take advantage of the STM focus a little more accurately. Anyway, that being said, the lens itself, it focuses nicely. I also have to say it certainly has stood out to me that this is one of the best implementations of Canon's image stabilizer system that I have seen to this date. It is literally perfectly silent. You cannot hear when it starts, you cannot hear when it stops. And so it's perfectly integrated in that way. And furthermore, it's very, very mannerly. There's none of that kind of jumping or shaking as it begins to kick in, but rather as soon as you go to take a picture, it is stabilizing, it is ready to go, and so it's very positive in that way. I mentioned earlier that I prefer USM motors to the STM technology. Because of the nature of the stepping motor, even when you are manually focusing, it is still the focusing motor that is shifting the elements. And so as a result, there's a bit of a lag as you begin to make an adjustment. And this lens does offer full-time manual override. But even if you do that manual override, there's just a bit of a lag between what you're doing and then what the focusing motor is doing as it moves the elements. And so it can be a little bit of a challenge because you might focus beyond the point you want to because of that lag. And it takes some adjustment, which is fine if you're shooting this kind of lens all the time and your brain just over time begins to adapt for it. But if you're not, like me, I shoot a large variety of lenses. To me, it always is a bit disconcerting because there is that bit of lag. And so that's not my favorite thing about it. Optically, this lens is very good. Throughout its focal range, the zoom action is incredibly smooth. This is a really, really nice damped lens. It's a very, very light lens. It doesn't feel cheap necessarily. Of course, I've been reviewing a variety of Zeiss lenses recently, and so everything feels light after a Zeiss. But even by looking at the raw numbers, this is about 30% lighter than the 24-105 L series lens, and it feels very light. I don't think that anybody's going to have an issue carrying this lens around for any length of time. But at the same time, while it doesn't feel as premium as some of Canon's lenses, the build quality is nice, and the zoom action is very nice. It does have a lock for lens creep, but it is a very light front element, and I haven't yet really experienced anything that would make me think that that's actually going to be necessary all that often. But it's certainly nice to have it as a just in case. I did note, just on a purely cosmetic level, this lens has two switches, autofocus and manual focus, and then on and off for the image stabilizer. I did note that compared to earlier lenses, it is rotated a little bit higher up on the barrel, and rather to the side. It's really at more of a, say, a 10 o'clock type position. And so as a result, I've sometimes looked down and checked to make sure that the bayonet mount was twisted all the way into place, just because it's visually different than what I'm accustomed to for Canon lenses. But the truth of the matter is, it's probably a pretty logical move for Canon, because it is easier as you're just looking down at the camera to see those switches without having to rotate the camera and to look from the side. This, like the 24-105, has a 77 millimeter front filter thread, and but other than that, it has a narrower body that kind of tapers out towards that front, and so the front element is as you can see, quite a bit wider than what it is towards the base of the lens. The image quality is, I have not really found any shortcoming in the optical quality. It handles well in a lot of situations. It is very, very flare resistant. It doesn't seem to have a lot of ghosting. Chromatic aberrations are nicely handled. It does have some barrel distortion on the wide end, and fortunately, just this week that I'm doing this review, actually just yesterday, Adobe released the new release for Lightroom and Camera Raw that now contains a profile for this lens, which they did not previously have. And it's nice to have, because there certainly is some barrel distortion on the wide end that's noticeable, and I was working at correcting manually before, but getting a slight bit of a mustache pattern in the distortion, and so I'm glad to have that profile to help with that. But really, this lens is very mannerly in the field. Another nice thing about it is it has a very close minimum focus distance, 40 centimeters compared to the 45 centimeters of the Canon 24-105, which means it'll have just a slight bit more of maximum magnification. Now, unlike the 24-105 f4L, this is a variable aperture lens, which means that as you proceed throughout the zoom range, the aperture is going to narrow down. At its widest, at 24 millimeters, it's f3.5. And so technically, it actually has a wider aperture than the f4 lens at that point. That being said, that advantage lasts for a sum total of about 3 to 4 millimeters. And yes, by the time you get even to 30 millimeters, it's already moved on to f4, and it's not long after that that it's at 4.5, and then at f5, and by the time you get to about 50 millimeters or slightly over, it's already at its narrowest aperture of f5.6. And so really throughout the majority of the focal range, it is a full stop slower, or lets in a full stop less light than what the f4L IS lens does. And so that's something to consider if you're going to be dealing with situations where you need lower light capabilities. While f4 is not the greatest these days, with the performance of Canon's current generation, and I imagine even greater with the next generation, with their high ISO performance, really an f4 lens, it can be used in an incredible amount of situations, particularly with a good image stabilizer like that lens has. And of course, this lens has an even more effective image stabilizer. I would still prefer that f4 aperture towards the long end, but of course, this is being marketed for a different audience, and someone who is very value conscious, and for the value, or for the cost of the lens, this is going to be a high value proposition in terms of its image quality and its functionality in the field. And I would imagine that over time, as the price drops even a bit more, it will become even more so of a great value. But when you compare it to those that are more direct comparisons, the price point is reasonable for it, and it's certainly a fair amount of lens for the money. And so if you are looking for a versatile lens that isn't going to break the bank, this new 24-105 STM lens, it certainly has a lot going for it. But at the end of the day, you have to still face that question. Is it worth buying this lens over buying even a used copy of the 24-105 f4L IS? I would say that if the money was fairly close to being equal, I still would go for the L series lens myself. That being said, I think that this lens maybe will make more sense down the road when both the price begins to drop and the STM technology, or the ability to kind of fully take advantage of the STM technology, is implemented in more of Canon's full-frame bodies in the future. Thanks for watching today and enjoying this snowy Canadian winter day with me. And it's only a week away from Christmas, so although you'll see this after Christmas. Merry Christmas to you all. I've got a lot of great reviews coming in the new year that you'll want to tune in to check out, including Zeiss's legendary 15mm Distagon f2.8 lens, and then also a trio of new telephoto lenses that a lot of people are really pumped about, including Canon's new 100 to 400mm lens, and this is the Mark II generation of that, along with Canon's 400mm f4DO technology, and also Mark II of that. And that's an amazing telephoto lens that is just recently released and coming to market. And then, of course, a lot of people are excited to check out Sigma's 150 to 600mm telephoto lens that's just been released, and we'll stack that up against Tamron's 150 to 600 and see how they compare out. Lots of great things to look forward to, and I look forward to sharing with you in the new year. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.